What's going on, U.S. history kids? Last video lecture of 2020. Good riddance to this very long, traumatic, and troubling year. Last one. Today, we're going to talk about the Infinity Stones. Do you like mine? Perfectly balanced, as all things should be. 5 more till I control the world. But anywho, let's actually talk about real things. Besides my quest for world domination. We'll talk about World War I and the home front. We've talked about so far what led into the war, how the war kind of played out in terms of how it was like, the just general conditions of the war. Today we're going to talk about, though, how the war is being waged at home, what Americans are doing at home to help the war effort. That's all about the home front. So that's what we're going to get started today, and that's what we're going to go into. So the home front. The home front pretty much just describes what's going on in America. What are people doing in America so that Americans abroad can succeed in their war effort, and America as a country can succeed in its war effort? It's just the battle at home. It's the battle at home to win the war abroad. This is also referred to as like total war. Another way to put it. And total war is just when a country devotes kind of every aspect of its government, economy, and really daily life to winning a war. And kind of what the rest of this video is going to describe really shows that, how that plays out. So pay attention to the pictures and some of the things I'm saying. So the first step for America to really win the war was to build an army. And so some of the stuff that happened on the home front was the idea of getting more soldiers enlisted. So the Congress passed the Selective Service Act, which essentially created the draft, which meant that young men between the ages of like 18 and 26 could be drafted by lottery to go off and fight the war. Now, a lot of men were willing to enlist because they felt there was a patriotic sense of duty. A lot of that is perpetrated by and propped up by the propaganda that exists of this time. But eventually over 4 million men were drafted to fight for the US in World War I and fighting across Europe. World War I is where we first get kind of this first real Uncle Sam, or I guess not first real, but where Uncle Sam really starts becoming popular. The idea of, I want you for the US Army, telling you, hey, go down to your local recruiting station, go fight a war. We'll talk more a little bit about propaganda here soon. We also had to construct a war economy, right? Because to win a war, you need to have a lot of money, okay? So the U.S. first off had to raise taxes. It raised taxes across the board and started doing things like that. They also borrowed a lot of money, and they did so in they borrowed a lot of loans. They borrowed a lot of money using loans to pay for the cost of war. They also sold bonds, war bonds, which we're going to talk about in a second. They rationed goods as well. There was a nationwide rationing, whether it be food, gas, boots, to save for the soldiers. You see kind of on the right there, it's the cool little saying, save the wheat, help the fleet, eat less bread, right, to save some for the soldiers. That'll come up later too when I show you more propaganda pictures. We also helped the Europeans set up blockades in the North Sea to try and prevent goods from getting in and out of Germany. So that's not necessarily on the home front, but that's just a part of government decisions that were going on to help win the war. So we had to build a war economy, because the only way you're going to win a war is you got to have money. So let's talk specifically about war bonds. The concept of a war bond was created in World War I. And again, the U.S. government needs money to fund their war effort. Now, here's how a war bond works. It's basically an investment. Think of it like this. The government knocks at your door and says, hey, Mr. Tomei, would you like to buy a war bond to help support the American efforts in World War I? And I'm like, sure, tell me about it. And so what they tell me is they're like, okay, look, if you give me $1,000 right now, in 20 years, we will pay you back that $1,000 plus we'll pay you $50 interest, meaning you'll make $50 off this investment. So in my head, I'm like, shoot, 20 years, I got to give up $1,000. I'm not going to get paid back for a long time. And I'm only going to make $50 interest. That's only math. If 100 out of 1,000 is said, that's only like 5%. I'm going to be like, I don't know. Like, that doesn't really seem like that good of a deal. But then, of course, a lot of people bought these who were patriotic Americans, people who believed in the war effort and wanted to help their country. So even though these investments, you were going to make money, but they weren't like the big, I bought Bitcoin, I invested in Tesla, I invested in Amazon type money. This was a good deal. And so the war bond concept became popular in World War I and also World War II. So it's important to kind of recognize the history of the war bond. Let's talk about propaganda. Propaganda is the spreading of ideas to promote a cause or to damage an opposing cause. The U.S. used propaganda to build anti-German resentment and get Americans to continue to support the war effort. So on the right, there's a propaganda piece that talks about, we are saving you, you save food. That's a call, again, trying to play on your heartstrings, your emotions, depicting a battle in the background, saying well-fed soldiers will win the war. What about buying war bonds? Why don't you help Uncle Sam stamp out the Kaiser? The Kaiser is kind of the German president, the German leader. Buy U.S. government bonds, right? So it shows a big Uncle Sam stepping on, the Kaiser there. Let's look at some other propaganda pieces. Even in dog enlists, why not you? This one's cool because this is like right here at U.S. Army recruiting station in San Francisco. Yeah, but dogs were pretty popularly used in World War I because they were faster and they could navigate the trenches a lot better. So a lot of times dogs carried like medical gear or messages across the trenches. So, even saying, this is like saying, what, you're going to let a dog enlist and not you? All right, again, trying to get men to join the military. This one is about like, hey, come into the garden, right? Make your own garden. It says, come into the garden, Dad. Make this summer's garden, provide next winter's vegetables. So again, this was the idea of, hey, let's build a garden. If you have a backyard, build a garden, and then, don't go to the grocery store to get your vegetables and fruits. Go to your backyard. Again, rationing food, saving food for soldiers, right? That was really important. They say they even tell you grow potatoes, beans, peas, and onions, right? Those are probably foods that the U.S. government was like, we're kind of in low supply of those, and we need to save more for the soldiers. So let's encourage people to do that and grow those. And again, you have the kid with the shovel, and so it's trying to make it like anyone can do this, right? Anyone can build a garden, right? There was an appeal to women, right? So, this is like an older kind of woman, right? Help America's sons win the war, buy government bonds, right? Again, appealing to kind of like the older like people, especially the older like white women, to be like, oh, I got to support the war effort. Here's money, right? This one's a really interesting one because a magazine like 10 years ago tried to do this with LeBron James and I think her name's Erin Andrews. She's a sportscaster, but it had like a lot of racial overtones. You can look into that, look it up. But it's destroy this mad brute, enlist in the U.S. Army. And there's a lot going on here, so let me explain. First, I tried to almost go ahead of myself. So you have a kind of gorilla depicted beast with its mouth ajar and its fangs. Now, if you zoom in, you'll notice on the face, the gorilla has a curled up mustache, almost like mine, except it's really blonde. It also has a helmet that says militarism with a pointed top. Now, you might not know this, but you're about to. Those are dead giveaways for stereotypical German themes at this time. The idea of the curled blonde mustache, or in general, the blonde hair. And the pointed helmet is what a lot of German soldiers had for their helmet. They had a pointed top on their helmet. That's how you would identify a German soldier. Now, another giveaway is on the bat, or you could say club. There's culture is what it's spelled out, but it's spelled with a K. a lot of the German language has that K kind of instead of a C, right? What you would think is a C in German language is going to be oftentimes be a K. The K is a big part of like the German language. And so what we see here is this mad brute, this gorilla type beast, okay, with a bat. The bat on the end looks bloody. That bat says culture on it. So the idea of this beast has, or this mad brute has beat in the culture into someone. And if you look in the sand where he's just kind of walking on, it says America. So again, this beast has just gotten here. He's on the sands of America. And of course, what does America love most, right? Or what does it want to protect most? The idea of like the woman, the helpless woman who can't defend herself. Her you know, her dress is kind of fallen down to kind of depict some sexualization of her, right? That we need to protect her from, you know, they're trying to pretty much saying that this mad brute is going to like assault or rape her. That's kind of the theming, right? In the background, you see cities or towns destroyed. That's the theming of all this, right? That this mad brute is going to come here, take our women, destroy, beat in your culture, your way of life will change. And at the bottom it says enlist in the U.S. Army. So this is a pretty famous, actually, World War I propaganda piece. It's probably actually, if you type in World War I propaganda, will probably be the first thing you'll see on Google and Google Images. So this one is very involved. There's a lot going on here. But I just wanted to explain that to you of what's kind of going on here. And again, look up the LeBron James magazine one. You could just type in like LeBron James Mad Brute magazine cover, something like that. It'll probably pop up on the Google Images. And you'll understand why it's kind of like racist. That was like 10 years ago too. Let's talk about women in the war effort, right? So oftentimes like men are the focus points of almost every war movie. But there's also a lot of credit that needs to be given to women, especially in World War I. While millions of men were fighting abroad, right? Women took up many of the jobs that the men left behind. Women were really critical in organizing fundraising for the war effort, in general, kind of organizing the rationing of goods and supplies for the war effort. There would be gardening clubs, there'd be knitting clubs because to knit socks, things like that. And they would organize in all their communities. And women really led the charge with that. Again, a lot of jobs were gone, and so there was a big need in the medical field for like nurses and whatnot. Again, because women at that time, it was rare that you could really become a doctor. But women provided, and they really stepped up, and they enter, and they're like, we can do this medical care, no problem. We're just as good at providing medical care. And women helped a lot of wounded soldiers. Women were actually sent to Europe to actually provide like medical aid kind of away from the battlefield. But when soldiers were sick or hurt, they would go to these hospitals. And a lot of the stuff that the women were coming up with and doing on the fly really greatly advanced medical practices and methods for years to come. World War I was also really the kind of the beginning of the American Red Cross, which today supports a lot of like disaster relief efforts now. Like if there's a hurricane or earthquake or a tornado, the Red Cross is ready to go and provided there. But the Red Cross became very popular and became very credible for their work in World War I. And most of the people who were in the Red Cross were actually women who were putting up that good work. In general, you think about all these efforts, it was perfect timing, and it really showed that women were just as equal as men. It helped improve gender equality, and eventually, finally, women were granted the right to vote right after the war ended in 1919 with the 19th Amendment passing. So there was already a lot of like women's suffrage movement leading into the war, and then the war was kind of the final nail in the coffin to be like, look, we can do just what the men can do, right? We can do these jobs, we can provide medical care, you know, we're going to help win this war. So, you know, some historians would make the argument that the war itself did a great deal for improving gender equality in America. A lot of historians would actually probably make that argument. And again, this is just some pictures of what they did. So you see them kind of organizing maybe mail, working in factories, some women, right, on the front lines, actually, who were kind of providing medical care, building masks, um, doing messaging and typewriting, breaking codes. Yeah, and so I mean, women were doing a lot of things. They weren't just helplessly back at home. A lot of women were really doing big things for the war effort. Let's keep moving on. And again, this is talking about the Red Cross, right? So it shows a very powerful, strong woman helping an injured soldier and supporting maybe a family in need, right? We also got to talk about migration patterns at this time. Um, as a result of the needed jobs because of the World War, um, and in general, kind of the industrial center of America uh, is in the northern parts of the country. A lot of blacks left and fled the South. We've already talked about it, but the South, racist, segregated. It was not safe for black people, really, even after the Civil War, to live in the South. So blacks took the opportunity at any chance they could to move north. Blacks also came out west. This is the first time. It's known as the Great Migration at the turn of the 20th century, when we get to the early 1900s. That's how blacks settled in Los Angeles, the Bay Area. And you can kind of tell based on the arrows, typically what southern states these people were from, where they were most likely to go. So a lot of people who settled in California were usually going to be from the most western southern states: Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas. And then the middle southern states would go to the Midwest, and then the eastern southern states would go up the East Coast. And they settled in a lot of cities that were built for industry, factory work, and things like that. So that's how these cities up in the Northeast and Midwest became very populated um, during this time period. Now, as a result of so many people leaving the South, as well as the Southwest, but majority of black people lived in this part of the country at the time, there was a big vacuum, and there was needed there was a pull factor. Hey, to come to America, we need labor workers to work in the farms. So this is now the first time we start seeing Mexican immigrants really who had already been in America and working in the farms, but in a mass migration form. And as well, it's primarily Mexican, but also other Latin American immigrants who came especially Central American immigrants who came up, and they worked in the fields. So some settled in the South, but primarily most people settled along the Southwest, and especially in California, as there was a big push for farming because of the war effort. There are all these farms being built and developed, especially in the West Coast, which is kind of still a pretty fresh California with a lot of development and land for to go. So that's just some migration patterns that I think are important to notice. And I think this is the last slide here. We're talking about Woodrow Wilson now. Woodrow Wilson. He was president of the United States from 1913 to 1921. We've talked about him in the past. But he's the president that transitioned us through this war. He was all about peace. That was kind of his mindset. And he really wanted to stay out of the war originally, as we've learned about. But obviously, he became convinced to join the war after the sinking of Lusitania and learning the Zimmermann telegram. He was a pretty smart guy. He was very futuristic. He saw that the world was going to be more connected after World War I. And he kind of foresaw that there was going to be another world war if a League of Nations wasn't formed. He essentially kind of wanted to form the Avengers of like nations to try and protect the Earth, from events like World War I from happening again. So he predicted a lot of the future, actually, of the next like 30, 40 years after his presidency. But probably the biggest stain on his legacy is that he has a troubling history with racism. He showed like pretty racist films that we're going to talk about actually in our next unit at the White House. So as history judges him now, most people would describe him as a racist. But at the same time, that's why I present this information. So did a lot of good things, right? But we always got to take the character and the context of someone, right? We got to take them in their totality. So did a lot of good things to help the country, but made errors along the way. And so just important to mention those things because he'll be coming up often in this unit and slightly in the next one if you read about him, watch videos and whatnot. Okay, I think that's the end of our video here, team. Hopefully you're paying attention to watching because that was the homework assignment, right, for this week is that, had to take some things away from this video. But with that being said, have a great holiday break. Stay safe. Ready to get out of 2020. And I'm excited to see you guys in 2021. All right, take care, y'all.